the author reveal the relationship between the narrator and the captain? In this lesson, you will learn how to identify character relationships by analyzing shared experiences between characters. Let's review. We are reading O Captain, My Captain by Walt Whitman. This poem is about a ship returning from a journey and the narrator discovering that the captain is dead. We know that character relationships in a text shape our view or understanding of that text. For instance, if two characters fight, we know that they are enemies, and we will anticipate more conflict in the future. Or, if one character drops his stuff and another one helps him pick it up, we recognize that as kindness and will anticipate more kindness in the future. So with that in mind, in this lesson, we are going to review the text to identify how the author reveals character relationships by analyzing the experiences they share. When we want to identify character relationships by analyzing shared experiences, we can follow these 3 steps. 1. Circle words describing a relationship and consider the connotations. 2. Underline descriptions of shared experiences and consider the connotations. And 3. Ask, what does this reveal about the relationships between those characters? So here's my question. How does the author reveal the relationship between the narrator and the captain? Step 1 in identifying character relationships is to circle words describing a relationship and consider the connotation of them. Before we can do that, let me explain what I mean by words describing a relationship. Words such as mother, daughter, uncle, boss, friend, and so forth describe a relationship. By this I mean that if we know 2 people are sisters, we can understand that they probably have spent a lot of time together and know each other quite well. If we know that one guy is the employee and the other is the boss, then we can expect that they won't be spending a lot of outside time together going fishing or going to the movies. We also know the employee should show some respect to the boss, or he will likely be fired. So now that I've explained that, let's look at the text. From our question, we know we are focusing on the narrator's relationship to the captain. Let's start with the first stanza of our text. Let's skim the text for words that describe a relationship. In the first line, I see the words captain. We know from the use of this word that the narrator is part of a crew on a ship and that he is speaking to his captain. So we need to circle those words. Let's see. Farther down in the 7th line, I see the word captain again. Now, let's consider the connotation of that word captain. The captain is the one in charge on a ship, sort of like a boss. He is a person who is respected, obeyed, and trusted in order to have a successful journey. Let's go ahead and move on to the 2nd stanza now. Let's skim the text again. In the first line, I see the word captain again. Down in the 5th line, I see captain again, but I also see father. Now, I don't know about you, but this word surprised me. It made me wonder if the captain was his father. Although that is a possibility, I do notice the word is lowercase, so let's consider the connotation to see if that reveals anything. A father is a loving head of the family, someone you usually have a close relationship with. A captain and father are kind of similar in that they are both people you would spend immense amounts of time with, both expect a lot out of you, and both should be obeyed and respected. So that makes me think that he isn't really his father, but that he respects him deeply as he would his father. Wow, that seems pretty important. Let's hold that in the back of our minds and come back to it later. Let's move on to the last stanza now. Let's skim. In the first line, I see captain again. And in the 2nd line, I see father again. And then in the 7th line, I see captain again. But we've already considered these words, so it's time to move on to the 2nd step. The 2nd step in identifying character relationships is to underline descriptions of shared experiences and consider the connotations of them. Here's our text again. Let's look at the whole first stanza for shared experiences before we consider the connotations. In the first line, I see the words, our fearful trip is done. That trip is something they did together, so let's underline it. That whole 2nd line represents an experience they had together on their trip. The ship they were in weathered difficulty, and they were successful. Let's underline that whole line. I also see in line 4 that it says their vessel was grim and daring. That suggests to me that it has been dangerous, possibly deadly, but that they didn't lose courage. That is a shared experience. The rest of the stanza is his realization that the captain has died, so we'll skip it. Now let's consider the connotations of these experiences. I really see all of these experiences pointing to the difficulty of the journey they are returning from. Prior experience tells me that when people go through difficult times together, that often draws them closer to each other. They had to rely on each other through the tough times, and that creates a strong bond. This experience is really telling me that through the difficult times, the narrator has become close with the captain. Let's go ahead and look at stanza 2. Here's our text. I notice the first 4 lines of this stanza are really about the excitement of returning to a welcoming crowd, so we'll move to the last 4 lines. Here's where the word father shows up, which we already considered as an important part of this poem. Let's look for shared experiences now. Look at that next line, this arm beneath your head. If your arm is beneath someone's head, that seems like a shared experience. So let's underline that. The rest of the stanza is again the narrator coming to grips with the realization that the captain has died. I don't see any other shared experiences here, but remember, we aren't done yet. Let's think about the connotation of that underlined line. If you think about having your arm beneath someone's head, that's holding someone quite closely. It's almost like an embrace, something you reserve for only the people you are closest to. The other thing we need to keep in mind here is that the captain isn't dying. He's already dead. To hold a dead person close is something only someone who cares deeply about that person will do. This is a pretty significant experience. With that, let's move on to the last stanza. Here's the final stanza. In the second line, I see another reference to the narrator holding the captain. My father does not feel my arm. But looking over the rest of the stanza, I see it as really like a recap of the poem, referencing their victorious return and his discovery of the captain's death. He doesn't phrase them as things they did together, though, so we won't underline anything else. Let's look at the line we did underline. I noticed that not only is he saying he's holding him closely, but that he is using that word father again. Remember how emotionally charged that word is? This phrase is really showing us how important the captain was to the narrator, that he would hold a dead man closely and refer to him as father. This is a big deal. So let's see what our next step is. The last step is that I need to ask myself, what does this reveal about the relationships between characters? Let's look at the notes I made. You know what? Just by thinking deeply about the text and the annotations we've made, we've almost answered that question already. The narrator and the captain have an extremely close relationship, almost as father and son, due to their difficult and dangerous journey and having to rely on each other. Further evidence of their close relationship is that the narrator holds his captain closely even after he has died. So, back to our question. How does the author reveal the relationship between the narrator and the captain? The author revealed the extremely close relationship between the narrator and the captain in several ways. First, by describing a difficult journey which would draw them close to each other. Second, by having the narrator refer to the captain using the word father. By calling him father, we know the narrator saw him as a father figure and someone he cared deeply about. Finally, the author described the narrator holding his captain close, even in death. This embrace really demonstrated a closeness between the two, as only those we care for like family will we hold in death. So let's review the steps we took to identify character relationships. 1. Circle words describing a relationship and consider the connotations. 2. Underline descriptions of shared experiences and consider the connotations. And 3. Ask, what does this reveal about the relationships between those characters? In this lesson, you have learned how to identify character relationships by analyzing shared experiences between characters.